What is up, you guys? Naesam here, and in this video I'm going to be giving you guys some pro tips on being a god in Mythic Plus. Mostly revolves around gear sets and knowing your spec in different ways. I can only really tell you specific information on your spec for LA Shaman, but the tips will be for all classes and specs regardless. So, without further ado, let's get started. So if you've been playing Legion very consistently at all, you have definitely more than 2 legendaries. I personally have 10 right now. I have every single one for Ellie, and most people are probably around 5 or more at this point if they have had one main. So what you can do with this is everyone kind of has, like, I don't think there's a single spec in the game, this a DPS spec anyway, that doesn't have like certain legendaries that are better for single target and certain that are better for AoE. What you can do is you can make multiple gear sets. Like I currently have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, at least 7 gear sets that I use that have different legendary combinations and stuff. And basically what your goal is to have a setup for each different like situation. Like here is my normal single target setup. Here's my single target setup when I have heroism. Here's like a 3 target setup. Here's like my normal AoE setup. Here's my legendary trinket. There's a lot of different things that you can do. Here's like a setup for bosses with ads, because there's legendary shoulders or whatever. But I'm not going to go into super high detail of like what I do in every single boss, or every single situation, but my main tip is going to be that for every DPS spec, everyone that has the Kill Jaden's Burning Wish, something I've been experimenting with, you put on this trinket, and equipping it triggers a 30-second cooldown, unfortunately. But basically, like, you put it on preemptively, like as soon as you finish a boss, you put it on before you run to the next trash, then you use it on that trash, and then it's on a 1.15 minute cooldown, or a 1 minute 15-second cooldown, which isn't actually 1.15 minutes. And then, I'm going to demonstrate this. I want to wait the extra 2 seconds here so I can just show you. So it's like a big trash pack. You use the trinket, you know, do all this stuff, and then once you're out of combat, since it lets me out of combat, it's going to keep running away. Okay. It's not letting me do it for some reason. There we go. You switch back to your other sets, and it still goes down the cooldown. You should probably have like a record to track it, something I've been wanting to do, but haven't had the time to really stop and look for. And then once this gets down to a 30-second cooldown left, like 30 seconds left, you put it back on, and you actually lose no time on it. It's as if you've had the trinket on the entire time. The only thing you're losing is the stats. But by taking it off, you're putting on other legendaries, so you aren't really losing anything out of it. But what you're gaining is the ability to use this trinket on cooldown. Like here's the 33 seconds left, you put this trinket back on, you don't lose anything. It doesn't give 30 seconds to the cooldown, it only goes up to 30 seconds max. Let's see, it goes back up to 30 seconds if it's below 30 seconds. So you want to try and kind of put this on every time it's getting close to 30 seconds left, like after a trash pack or whatever. So you can then use it again and then take it back off immediately after. So that's like the biggest tip I can give to all DPS specs, is do stuff like that for on-use legendaries, which is, I'm pretty sure, just this one. And then other than that, it's basically just having as many setups as you're comfortable with. Generally, like, you should be fine if you just have 2 to 3 setups. Like 1 setup for single target, 1 for AoE, and then 1 for the trinket. And if you even just having that, you're going to improve your performance massively. My next tip is mostly going to be, it's going to be different for every class, so you kind of have to do your own research. What it comes down to is you really need to know your, like, stat weights, I guess. Or not really stat weights. Most DPS specs only have actual stat weights that function properly for everyone. Only really healers have that, and tanks maybe. But you kind of have to know what your stats do and how they benefit you in different ways. Like for LA Shaman, for single target, you want like no haste, you want a bunch of crit and mastery, you want some versatility, and that's pretty much it. For AoE though, you want as much fucking haste as you can get, and then crit, and then you want like no mastery, and then a little bit of versatility. So it's completely backwards when it comes to the mastery and haste part, which makes it a little awkward. But that's why for like, let's say you've already done my previous tips. You already have the 3 sets or more. One being your single target set with your normal stat weights that the theory crafters posted or whatever, or you simmed or whatever, or your stat ratios. But the thing is that most theory crafters don't post stats for AoE. So you might have to do this yourself. And the way you could probably do this is go into SimCraft and sim for like 4 or 5 targets for like 10, 20 seconds and kind of just see what shows up, I guess. Maybe a little longer than that, because you're not always going to have your cooldowns. I might actually end up writing a SimCraft profile for Mythic Plus so you can like somewhat actively or accurately sim it, but if that happens, I'll make a video on it. But for now, you can just do like something 4 or 5 targets, or like depending on the dungeon, maybe 3 targets, and see what comes out. And I feel like generally most specs want haste, so if you're going to be lazy, I guess, I don't know. But you want to have as much gear with the AoE stats on your AoE legendary set. Like here's my AoE legendary set, I have a ton of haste. And there's a lot of, or not a lot of specs, but some specs have like breakpoints, like LA Shaman has Earthquake breakpoints at certain percentages of haste, that being 16.66 and 33.33, or 34 actually. So as an LA Shaman, if you're getting close to the breakpoint, you want to push for it. There's like a lot of little things like that that specs have that you don't necessarily hear about very much, because theory crafting in general is kind of flawed in the sense that it's always focusing on single target, even though currently in raids there's virtually no actual single target bosses. Everything it has ads involved. So you want to do your own research and find out what your stats are so you can have a proper gear setup for your AoE, your trash set. And this is how I do so much damage in Mythic Plus. It's having this super good trash set ready. Another pretty big tip I have is just, as I said earlier, keep in mind that theory crafting is generally based around a single target. So, like your single target talents, like this setup right here is my single target talents. Never have I actually used this in a Mythic Plus dungeon intentionally. Sometimes it happens because I don't remember to change talents, but never have I actually used single target talents in a Mythic Plus because I wanted to use single target talents in Mythic Plus. Except for like maybe the really rare occasion where you're going into like an Eye of Ajara 21 and it's tyrannical and you know there's not enough single target in the group to kill the last boss. Then maybe you want to spec into single target burst or single target damage in general, but generally AoE is a lot more useful for getting good times and good damage in Mythic Plus. So looking at this talent right now, I don't want a single target damage cooldown. I'm going to go to the AoE one. I don't want like extra charges of a single target spell. I want the AoE spell. So you change your talents. It's not generally that many changes for at least us, but like just keep in mind that don't just blindly follow talent suggestions by the theory crafters. You can actually look on warcraftlogs.com and look at the parses for Mythic Plus and see what people are using talents-wise for your spec, whatever spec you happen to play, and you can kind of figure out what's netting the most damage. Just remember that a lot of these parses are either really, really high Mythic Plus where things live for a long time, so if the damage is like a 20-second AoE dot or something, I don't think there's anything like that in the game, but just as an example, you may want to consider something else if you're doing like a +5, because you're never going to actually get anything out of that. But it's a good little guideline. It's better than just going with single target talents for sure. I have a couple more little miscellaneous tips that don't really go together, so I'm just going to kind of say them. Again, this kind of coincides with don't just blindly follow theory crafters when it comes to Mythic Plus, because Mythic Plus is its own little game. Like, Mark of the Hidden Satyr is the most common neck enchant for casters, I believe. Pretty much most casters have this simming as their highest. Maybe I'm completely wrong about that, but LA Shaman at least has this simming as their highest. But it's completely single target. It only procs on one target, so even if there's one other target in the room, it's probably not going to be better. So I personally went with Mark of the Claw because, as I mentioned earlier, crit and haste are kind of my forte. But if your spec has like Mastery doing well for AoE or anything, you may want to consider that if you have a different neck for your AoE set. Also keep in mind that Nighthold itself is a very AoE heavy raid, or cleave heavy raid, so Mark of the Hidden Satyr is not really recommended for that either. And one other thing is that Sephuz, or any other legendary that's underrated on single target. Sephuz itself is like honorable mention, I guess. Sephuz is kind of godly in Mythic Plus for almost every spec, because you can proc it very frequently, as interrupts or stuns, and it gives you a ton of haste, and haste is generally a pretty good stat for AoE. I've just noticed that as like a trend for most specs. So even if haste isn't a good stat, it's still 25%. That's kind of crazy. You can do it every 30 seconds, and the movement speed is also very helpful for Mythic Plus because you're constantly running around, and like Volcanic, you can take like 2 milliseconds to step out of it if you have a proc. Things like that. It's a very underrated legendary when it comes to dungeons. And then last thing is there are trinkets like Whispers in the Dark that is really, really good on single target, but for AoE, or for not really for AoE it'd be good too, but for inconsistent things like Mythic Plus, if you get a proc at the wrong time, it's going to screw you over because you get a proc at the end of a mob pack. Best case scenario, you right click it off before you get to the next one, or like if you're not going to get this next one immediately, you right click it off and have as little downtime as possible. But there's a lot of situations where this thing will fuck you over. So look into things like Fury the Burning Sky or stuff like that. I currently have a 925 socketed one that I want to start playing with. I mean, that damage is kind of crazy. So little things like that, so like it basically what it comes down to is don't blindly follow theory crafting. I've said this like 10 times now. Just remember that AoE and single target are very, very different for most specs, and trinkets like this that are normally seen as really shit for most specs can be really, really good. But just to summarize what I've mentioned, you want to have multiple gear sets, single target, AoE. If you have legendary trinket, you want one with that to kind of take advantage of it, I guess. If you are like a shaman or whatever, you have hero helm set. Like, you just want to have as many sets as you think you are going to actually use. You want to know your specs stats very, very well, so you can kind of maximize your damage output by having AoE stats, like 3 target stats, and single target stats. And you want to be looking for AoE talents, you want to be looking for AoE enchants, you want to be looking for AoE gems on your AoE pieces, and you want to be looking into trinkets for AoE. Again, like, keep in mind that like just because you're using this trinket on AoE set, like you have this on this set, you can always just switch back to your single target set before the boss, and you can have your super good single target trinkets again. So you can kind of like, this is all about maximizing benefit from everything you have. Normally on a boss fight, the reason you can't do this because you're in combat the whole time, you can't switch gear sets. But Mythic Plus is the place where you can maximize everything, even like Fighter Chow. I just bought a whole bunch of it to try it out. Where'd it go? I have no idea where it went. But I just bought a whole bunch of Fighter Chow. Here it is, to try it out in Bursting Week, just because I feel like most of the damage is probably going to come after mobs die when you're out of combat. Stuff like this could really, really maximize how far you can push your Mythic Plus keys. There are a lot of little things to Mythic Plus, but I feel like I've gone over pretty much all the excuse me, all the major things. So hopefully you guys learned something. It's mostly just the sets. The sets are the bread and butter of Mythic Plus for me. So hopefully you guys learned something. Hopefully this helped you guys out. And thanks for watching, and I'll see you guys next time.